Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. This starts Madhya Mula. Yeah. Madhya Mula Paramananda Puri Mahodhev. Ashtadike Ashtamula Brikka Koilaste. Madhya Mula Paramananda Puri Mahadev. Ashtadike Ashtamula Brikka Koilaste. Madhya Mula Paramananda Puri Mahadev. Ashtadike Ashtamula Brikka Koilaste. Madhya Mula, the middle root, Paramananda Puri, of the name Paramananda Puri. Mahadhira, most sober. Ashtadike, in the 8 directions. Ashtamula, 8 roots. Brikka, the tree. Koilastea, fixed. Translation: with the sober and grave Paramananda Puri as the central root, and the other 8 roots in the 8 directions, the tree of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu stood firmly. Please repeat. With the sober and grave Paramananda Puri as the central root, and the other 8 roots in the 8 directions, the tree of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu stood firmly. So there's no purport for this and several more verses, so I'll read right through to text 25 when Srila Prabhupada gives us a nice purport. Skandera upari bahu saka upajila, upari saka asankya haila. From the trunk grew many branches, and above them innumerable others. Visha saka kori eko mandal, maha saka choila brahmanda sakal. Thus the branches of the Chaitanya tree formed a cluster or society with great branches covering all the universe. Purport: our International Society for Krishna Consciousness is one of the branches of the Chaitanya tree. Maybe we should just speak on that one. Ekoika sakate upashaka shato jato upajila saka kegoni bekato. From each branch grew many hundreds of sub-branches. No one can count how many branches thus grew. Mukha saka ganer nama anagan agita koriba shuna brikara banan. I shall try to name the foremost of the innumerable branches. Please hear the description of the Chaitanya tree. Brikore upari shaka hoila dui skanda eka advaita nam aranitananda. At the top of the tree, the trunk branched into 2. One trunk was named Sri Advaita Prabhu, and the other Sri Nityananda Prabhu. Seiduka skande bahu saka upajila tada upasaka gane jagat choila. From these 2 trunks grew many branches and sub-branches that covered the entire world. Badasaka upasaka tada upasaka jata upajila tada ke koripe lekha. These branches and sub-branches and their sub-branches became so numerous that no one can actually write about them. Sisya prasisya ara upasisya gan jagad vyapila tada nahika ganan. Thus the disciples and the grand disciples and their admirers spread throughout the entire world, and it is not possible to enumerate them all. And then finally, text 25. Udambara brikka jaina fale sarva ange eimata brikka brikke sarvatra palla lage. As a big fig tree bears fruits all over its body, each part of the tree of devotional service bore fruit. Purport: This tree of devotional service is not of this material world. It grows in the spiritual world where there is no distinction between one part of the body and another. It is something like a tree of sugar. For whichever part of a tree one tastes, it is always sweet. For whichever part of such a tree one tastes, it is always sweet. The tree of bhakti has varieties of branches, leaves, and fruits, but they are all meant for the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There are 9 different processes of devotional service. Sravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. But all of them are meant only for the service of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, whether one hears, chants, remembers, or worships, his activities will yield the same result. Which one of these processes will be the most suitable for a particular devotee depends upon his taste. Srila Prabhupada ki Oma Jnana Timanhandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, but my spiritual master has forced open my eyes with the scalpel of knowledge. I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto him. This is a very famous verse. In fact, this is a verse spoken by Prahlad Maharaj. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, Smaranam Padasevanam, Archanam Vandanam Dasyam, Sakyam Atmanivedanam. And this was his response to his father's inquiry, what's your favorite subject at school? Most parents will ask, do you like your maths? Do you like your biology? What's the best thing you've learned from your teachers? Very innocent question for any parent to ask. And of course, Prahlad Maharaj interpreted that one of my teachers is Srila Narad Muni. When I was just in the womb, I was also hearing through my mother from Narad. And this is what he taught me, that just by these 9 processes of devotional service, one can entirely perfect one's life. I love that Srila Prabhupada, his only comment in all those other purports was, by the way, ISKCON is also a valid branch of the Caitanya tree, in case anyone had any doubts. So actually it's a statement of great humility that you can tell, I think I mentioned this a week or 2 ago, you can tell the efficacy of a thing by looking at the fruits. So important for us to always be able to see the fruits. Is the preaching going on nicely? Is it enlivening people? Are they progressing in their Krishna consciousness? Or are we riddled by scandals? These are different fruits that you could look at any society and so on. So Srila Prabhupada has introduced these 9 processes of devotional service and engaged us. Each of them could be suitable for achieving perfection. Each of them, by concentrating on only one of them, one could achieve perfection. And in a moment I'll read from Srila Rupa Goswami's description of which particular devotees excelled in each of these practices. But then Srila Prabhupada says, according to one's natural taste. Now I'll be able to speak about some with a little bit more adhikar or authority than others. I don't know if I could yet espouse much by way of realization on befriending Krishna. Of course, we can always take a spirit of friendship with Krishna when we compose prayers, but mostly in the neophyte stages like my stage, one approaches the Lord in awe and reverence rather than that intimacy of friendship. But I'll be able to speak a little bit more on hearing and the importance of hearing, the importance of chanting, and so on. We were listening earlier to this verse this song by Govinda Das Kaviraj. He was actually a contemporary of Srila Jiva Goswami, and he was a deeply appreciated poet in the Vaishnav. The Vaishnavas living in that Bengal and Vrindavan areas in that period. And his songs were so deeply appreciated that Srila Jiva Goswami was encouraging, write more, write more. This is the only one that I know of that we really sing. And it is really wonderful, the meaning of Bhaja Hare Mana, very wonderful. He addresses his mind, which is interesting. And sometimes Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would also compose poems to his mind. Dushtaman, tumi kisher Vaishnav, pratishtara tore nejanara gare, tava harinam kevala koita. My dear mind, what kind of Vaishnav are you? Simply for some cheap adoration, you go to a secluded place and chant. So, criticizing those who don't preach, criticizing those who are chanting Hare Krishna just for name and fame. But he's actually chastising his own mind, which possibly is coming up with these schemes. Our mind is always coming up with schemes. That's the nature of the mind. Fully, filled with impulse. And to the degree that our minds are not yet purified, all kinds of thought processes will be there. Which is why it's described that until we've got on top of those mind's urges and essential urges, we shouldn't actually be a teacher. Only once we have conquered those urges are we actually fit to make disciples all over the world. Vacha Vegam, Manasa Krodha Vegam, Jiva Vegam, Udara Pashta Vegam, Jivo, how does it go? Thank you. So, how do we overcome those urges? We have to train the mind. And this is what Govindadas Kaviraj is describing. My mind, will you please just repose yourself at the feet of the son of Nanda Maharaj? In this way you'll become fearless. In this way you'll cross over all your anxieties, all the things that you think you're missing out on, all the things you're worried might happen. Our mind is full of these thoughts. You'll become fearless and peaceful when you repose your mind at the son of Nanda Maharaj's feet. Then, how does it go? Bhaja Hare Mana Sinandanandana Dulabha Manava Janama Satsange. This human form of life is rarely achieved. And you must take advantage of the association of saintly persons. In this way only you'll be able to cross over the ocean of material suffering. Sita Atava Bhatta Barishana Edina Jamini Jagire. I'm always suffering the dualities of this world, the heat and the cold, the wind and the rain. For a fraction of flickering happiness, I've uselessly served wicked and miserly men. So he's saying we're always in a spirit of service, but we'll only find peace and satisfaction and relief from these material dualities when we serve the lotus feet of Krishna. What assurance of real happiness is there in all of one's youth, Edana Jovana, wealth, Putra Parijana, one's sons, one's family members and associates? What assurance of real happiness is there in all of these things? Kamala Dala Jala Jivana Talamala. Any moment in time, these could be ripped away, just like a drop of water is just hanging on the edge of a lotus petal. We know that the lotus petal is quite waterproof, and so if some water comes on it, it'll immediately run off. So our life is hanging like that, precariously. Talamala, very precarious. Therefore take shelter. And then the final verse, he quotes a version of this Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu. Just these substitutes, Archana and Pujana. That's the same meaning. So what are these 9 processes? Let me first of all read Srila Rupa Goswami's verdict. I won't read the Sanskrit. Parikshit Maharaj attained salvation simply by hearing. So Shravan means to hear, to be open to the message of Godhead, to be urgently wanting to imbibe the message of Godhead, to understand the messages that Krishna is passing down, Krishna's devotees are passing down. We know that we're encouraged, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. This should be a daily activity or even a constant activity. Nityam literally means eternal or constant. We should be constantly exposing ourselves. Why? Because the material nature is also full of propaganda. We're being bombarded by material sound vibrations, full of enthusiasm for enjoying the material world. Unless we're hearing from those devotees who are infused with self-realization and love, by exposure to the mundane sound vibration, we might very well find that mundane desires awaken. Sangat sanjayate kama. Srila Prabhupada translates in the purport to that verse. One's desires and ambitions develop according to the company we keep. And keeping company is especially about the sound vibration. What kind of messages? Therefore, Lord Chaitanya says, Gramya Katha na shunibe, don't hear the village talk. It's very dangerous. We shouldn't think that we're immune, that we can, watch Netflix or gossip on Facebook, and that somehow or other that won't have an impact. We should at least be taking very strong doses daily of the vaccine of Krishna Katha. That will prevent us from being infected by material conditions. Let me see, I have a few other notes here about hearing in particular. So what does it mean to master hearing or to perfect hearing? Srila Prabhupada would talk about how eager Maharaj Parikshit was. He left everything. He left his other responsibilities. He left his kingdom. As soon as he learned of his imminent death, he gave up all other pursuits and only went to the banks of, was it the Godavari? The Godavari River, and listened, put his questions. This great eagerness is actually the most important criteria. There are many words actually used throughout the Vedas. Sususubhi, jigyasu, for being very open, deeply inquisitive. Hearing isn't just a passive activity. We should be straining ourselves to glean the message that is being provided by a bona fide representative, a proper via medium. If we don't develop that clear understanding, we should be petitioning with questions so as to arrive at a clear understanding. Again, if we notice how one of the main things that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur noted about Srila Prabhupada, and in many ways predicted how prolific a preacher Srila Prabhupada would be, that is, he knows how to listen. This person I've marked him, he knows how to hear, he knows how to listen. Srila Prabhupada would sit for many hours in the Kumbh Mela in the tent where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was speaking. Others were coming and going. Maybe they could focus for half an hour, 45 minutes, even maybe 1 or 2 hours. Prabhupada could do 8-hour shifts. Whatever eagerness the spiritual master had to share, he was eager to drink it up. And this is the kind of standard that's being presented to us. We sing it every day. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitte Te Koraya Aikya. Every word that comes from the lotus mouth of the spiritual master, we make one with our heart. Actually, in the translation that we normally give, some of the exact meaning might be a little lost. Chitte Koraya Aikya. Make it one with your heart. Ana Koriho Mani Asa. Don't desire anything else. Don't have any other agenda. That level of willingness to be obedient. We know that in Bhagavad Gita, Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadashana. The self-realized person can initiate you into knowledge. Why? Because they've seen the truth. But what makes you eligible? Pranipat, surrender. Willingness to obey, willingness to serve, to do whatever is requested or instructed by that holy authority. Pariprashna, rendering, asking questions. Submissive oral inquiry. And sevaya, rendering service. All of these represent the favorable conditions for mastering hearing. Deep thirst for knowledge, deep receptivity. And then what happens? Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhu Kadunai Shravanadi Sudha Chitte Kariye Udai. That dormant love of Krishna, which is in our hearts, is awakened. Our hearts become purified. Shuddha Chitte, they become cleansed of all other things. We hear this in Srimad Bhagavatam also. Shrinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtana hridyantosto hivadrani vidhunoti saritsatam. Therefore, Shravanam tends to be mentioned first, because if you think about it, it's the intervention of someone with higher realization. It's our exposing ourselves to another's consciousness, to Krishna's messages, to the message of Krishna's pure devotee, as opposed to only being lost in our own imaginary interpretations, our imaginary paradigm of the world. This absolutely needs to evolve. If left to our own understanding, we're actually in jeopardy. But when we submit ourselves routinely, gradually we get retrained. Hearing also means reading. So Srila Prabhupada's most important contribution, as seen by what he allocated his time to and drove with the utmost intensity, are the books. We know that Srila Prabhupada actually spoke his books, he spoke his purports, and he depended on others to transcribe and make them available in the printed word. I think if Srila Prabhupada was concerned about anything in this day and age, it would be whether people are taking full advantage of that labor of love, his books. That's not to decry wisdom of the sages, that's not to decry devotee podcasts and devotee exchanges and Srimad Bhagavatam class. But this is Srila Prabhupada's gift. To leave the gift unopened or leave it to one side, neglected, that is unfortunate. It's a great misfortune. So then there's Kirtanam. I deliberately, disproportionately spoke about Shravanam because I really want to stress that one. It's one I have a little understanding of. Kirtanam. Of course, we do Kirtanam in many different ways. Japa is a form of Kirtanam, chanting. We have our daily prescribed rounds, a very important duty, first and foremost of our duties. Of course, Kirtan is also the congregational chanting of the holy names, which also involves Shravan. We hear the leader singing a tune, and then we respond. And for the leader, maybe they're singing and then they're hearing the response. And this way, Shravan and Kirtan are a nice pair of activities that mutually support each other. Very purifying to hear the assemblies of vibration of the holy name with great heart and enthusiasm. The chanting also, or Kirtanam, also means to preach, to whatever we have heard, to pass that on, to share it with others, to explain Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada would often encourage not only devotees to give class and learn how to preach, but to write. In fact, this will deepen our own realization. We'll actually get an understanding of how much we've understood when we're in a position to actually try and explain it cogently, coherently. If we never practice, my suspicion is we never actually bed down those understandings. In one ear, out the other. We know that we have diminished memory in the age of Kali. One memory technique is repetition. Srila Prabhupada would say, if you repeat something 3 times, then it's yours. That way we retain. And I know myself, when I feel like I'm trying to explain a concept to somebody, it actually increases my engagement with the topic. Srila Prabhupada would use terms like important to discuss things threadbare, to assimilate this message of Krishna consciousness. And so preaching, sharing it with others, not only very, very pleasing to Krishna, but a very, very important way. It also creates social obligation. I want to live up to the very standard that I'm espousing, as opposed to, contribute to the age of hypocrisy by saying one thing and not being a shining example. Achar and prachar should be together. We know that Lord Caitanya, one of his most important instructions, Jori deko, tori koho, Krishna upadesh, amara gai guru hoya, tora eidesh. Others were talking of giving up their family situations, giving up their social responsibilities and joining Lord Caitanya. As Lord Caitanya was touring South India, he said, no, you stay here and tell whoever you meet everything you learned about Krishna. Whatever Krishna Upadesh, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, you describe that, you explain it to others. In this way, become a guru by my order, on my instructions, on my authority, and try to liberate everyone in this land, in this locality. So much debate these days. Who's a guru? Who's fit to provide instructions and be a guru? Lord Chaitanya is bypassing all of that, saying you should all become fit to be a guru. Who do you think you are to avoid my instructions? Amara Gaya. I'm telling you that I want you to become fit to be a guru. Of course, we must become fit, but that obligation is actually there on everybody. It shouldn't just be a rare number of people who pass the legacy on, but everyone who's fortunate enough to receive the legacy has a responsibility, a burden. In fact, the word guru means heavy. One who feels the heavy burden of responsibility, that I have all of this wisdom that has come down in disciplic succession. I feel a great obligation to share that with others. Of course, not everyone will go on to provide, diksha, Harinam diksha, or, and so on. But when it comes to being a shiksha guru, a Vatma Pradashak guru, everyone can according to their means. Srila Prabhupada would even notice sometimes the little baby Saraswati would say, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Does she really have a deep understanding of what this means? But still, she was becoming a transparent via medium, in passing on, unchanged, something that she had heard. Her words potentially had potency to the extent that she sincerely tried to represent Srila Prabhupada. Just seeing if I have any other notes on Kirtanam. Who was the great soul who perfected their life through Kirtanam? According to Srila Rupa Goswami, Sukadev Goswami attained salvation simply by chanting. His willingness to be absolutely available, even without resting, without breaking fast, 7 days straight, that level of enthusiastic sharing of Krishna consciousness to cater to that urgent desire of Maharaj Parikshit to hear. What an extraordinary sacrifice. There's a verse, Tapyante lokatapena sadhavas praisojana paramadanam taddi, I can't remember. I need to remember these verses. When Lord Shiva drinks the ocean of poison, there's a verse that says, a great personality almost always accepts voluntary suffering to ease the suffering of people in general. This is the highest method of worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada would talk about taking all risk. And we see in his life, taking all risk to spread Krishna consciousness meant crossing the ocean, just with a bag of cereal and some books, 40 rupees. Not knowing exactly where he was even going to lay his head. Sometimes being chased out by someone having a bad trip, chased out into the street in the Bowery at night time, not knowing whether to turn left or right. Sometimes going into the former USSR. And we saw the devotees there, what sacrifices, devotees in the Eastern Bloc. And still places around the world now where it's very, very dangerous to preach Krishna consciousness. But the devotee, so impassioned to share the message of Krishna. I have had the good fortune to hear this, now I must share. That would be a sign of being enthused. As Srila Prabhupada would say, a dead man cannot preach. So the instinct to share Krishna consciousness and make it available to others is a sign of vitality. Who was it who achieved perfection by remembering? Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad Maharaj attained salvation by remembering the Lord. Always mindful of Krishna, never forgetting, no matter what situations he was thrown into. Most of us are thrown into a suffering condition, would immediately start bemoaning the injustice of our situation. Prahlad Maharaj simply had full faith in remembering, even he's fed poison, even wild animals come to attack, even he's thrown into a pit of snakes. He only remembered Krishna. Is he here in this pillar? Yes, Father. He's even there in that pillar. Though he didn't have the slightest sense of separation. One time Srila Prabhupada talked about seeing Krishna always, and a helpful devotee decided to try and explain to those who'd asked the question, it means that in a figurative way, seeing Krishna in everything. No, I'm seeing Krishna always, Srila Prabhupada would say. He's always right there. This type of remembrance is actually the fruit of good hearing and chanting. If we are constantly absorbing ourselves in Krishna Katha, Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna book, if we're always involved in Krishna Katha with devotees, then we'll even dreams of Krishna. There won't be a time in our day, even if not chanting at that particular moment, where thoughts of Krishna don't come unbidden into our minds. And that is actually the level of consciousness we should be striving for. As we know, whatever state of consciousness one remembers when one quits this body, that state he will attain without fail. So actually we're reckless if we entertain other thoughts. You could argue it's a type of gambling to pursue other pastimes. If we train our minds to always be mindful of Krishna, remember Krishna, that is smaran, very important practice. And those higher stages of Raganuga Bhakti often involve that full-time meditation on serving Krishna in a particular way. So then who was the Padasevanam? Lakshmi Devi. Lakshmi Devi is constantly at the feet of Lord Narayan and always serving. Padasevanam seems a little abstract to us, possibly, but Srila Prabhupada would typically talk about going to the holy places and doing parikrama as an expression of Padasevanam. Of course, you could argue that even deity worship, placing a tulsi leaf on Krishna's feet is a form of Padasevanam. Washing those feet as part of the process of serving the deity. But that's covered here by archanam or pujanam, process of deity worship. Who was the person when it comes to deity worship, who achieved perfection? Prithu Maharaj, the elaborate sacrifices. We know that if we're fortunate to live in the vicinity of a temple, and how extraordinary that Srila Prabhupada would establish so many temples all around the world where devotees can gather and bow down before the deity, make offerings to the deity, live their life around the deity's timetable. This is really the idea of Archana, that Krishna becomes the center of our existence. Oh, it's time for Krishna to eat. I need to make sure that I'm in a cleansed condition, that I've prepared nice foodstuffs. In this way we learn to revolve our lives or completely absorb ourselves in Krishna. In the home also, one of the most important duties of a householder is actually to have the deity of Krishna in the home. Otherwise the home just becomes a griha medi. We're taking care of only mundane requirements and needs. As soon as one installs the deity of Krishna in the home, it becomes Krishna's temple. And the servants may happen to reside in that temple, but everything in that temple revolves around Lord Krishna. Every day making offerings, leaves, flower, fruit, water. And obviously when we come before the deity, we can also progress to Vandanam, making prayers. It's not that you have to be physically in front of Krishna, you can pray at any time. But certainly when we come before the deity, we should offer some prayers. Srila Prabhupada introduced us to the Brahma Samhita, and we know that there's 2 verses from Brahma Samhita when we greet the deities in the morning. Coming before the deity, Srila Prabhupada often talk about, it's actually about presenting ourselves, not just feasting our eyes on the deity, but actually presenting ourselves. Krishna, I'm here, I'm your servant, I'm reporting for duty. learning how to compose prayers, vandanam, is a really important and great way of perfecting our lives. We can again learn to relate to Krishna as a person, to speak directly with him. It may take us a while to hear his response. Sometimes he's very merciful and gives us a taste of those responses in some way. A garland falls or some other sign comes to us. Srila Prabhupada would encourage us not just to come up with our own prayers. In fact, the conditioned soul's prayers are often just petitions. I've got this exam coming up. I've got this awkward feeling in my... I think I might have some kind of inflammatory response to something. We shouldn't be asking Krishna for wealth. Nadanam najanam nasundarim. We shouldn't be asking for mundane things. Srila Prabhupada gave the metaphor of someone coming back from the forest carrying a bundle of sticks, and they kept dropping the sticks and it was a very heavy weight. And someone advised, you could turn to Lord Narayan and ask him to help ease your burden. So they called out with such intensity that the Lord appeared before them. Could you help me with these? There they have the darshan of the Supreme Lord, and we're asking for some, like Dhruva Maharaj called it, a piece of broken glass. We're asking for some cheap thing. So Srila Prabhupada would encourage that when we go before the deity, perhaps we can borrow one of the prayers composed by a truly great soul and find some way to put our sentiment in there. Ainanda tunujakin karam patitam vam vishambeva vambato kripaya tava pada pankaja stita duli sadrashang vichintaya. O son of Maharaj Nanda, I am your eternal servant. It's a real desperate call. But somehow or other I fell into this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up and restore me even as an atom in the dust of your lotus feet. Such a heartfelt prayer. We should be able to pray that with earnestness. Patita pavana hetu tava avatar moshamo patita prabhu napai bayara. Whenever I go in front of Lord Caitanya and Lord Nityananda, I do the first 3 verses of this song by Narottam Das Thakur, because it feels like I can actually be qualified somehow to be in their presence as a fallen soul being delivered by them. And there are so many of the songs by Narottam Das Thakur, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, where there's such humble expressions. Please bring about some auspiciousness for this fall, is one of the verses in Gopinath by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So we should be able to put our own heartfelt expression into those beautiful verses. Who was the person who achieved perfection through prayer? Akrura. Akrura attained salvation simply by offering prayers. What about Dasya, becoming the paramount servant? Hanuman. And we see these extraordinary examples of what risks Hanuman was prepared to take to serve his Lord. But also not puffed up. He could have defeated Ravana all by himself, but he wasn't going to upstage the Lord. He wasn't going to steal the Lord's chance to finish and vanquish that person. But we know that he would somehow even just open his chest and Lord Ram, Sita Ram, would be right there. Extraordinary lengths that Hanuman went to in his service. Who is the friend mentioned by Srila Rupa Goswami? Arjuna. It's interesting in this case because we know there are different kinds of friendship. There are formal types of friendship and then very informal. In Vrindavan, Madhu Mangal would be an informal friend, sometimes even being cheeky towards Krishna and possibly even abusive or at least teasing Krishna. And Krishna would love that close friendship. But at least here in this particular Arjuna even says at one point, I'm worried actually that I've joked with you like an informal friend, and actually I should only have awe and reverence for you. So part of why it was so uncomfortable, even though Arjuna asked for the proof of the Virat Rupa, it was so uncomfortable because it completely interfered with friendly feelings when he suddenly saw the universal form. And finally, the one who, Atmanivedana, offered everything. Bali Maharaj is the one mentioned here. But I believe Ambarish Maharaj is mentioned as perfecting all. Is that correct? Yeah. He actually achieved all. So the point is, any or all, but we should absolutely take great fortune from what Srila Prabhupada has offered us. Realize how wonderful and appealing these processes of devotional service are, and take them seriously. Aim to take one or all of them as a craft to be mastered, to be perfected. And any little effort being made sincerely in any of these, Krishna reciprocates thousands of %. Srila Prabhupada ki. There's perhaps a minute or two for questions or comments if anyone has any. Questions is part of Shravanam. And it would be a really good practice to master. Thank you. Maybe the battery won't. Just yell it out. Oh, there it is.
I was just thinking about when you were mentioning about how we can offer the prayers of the great acharyas in place of our own, and I was thinking, because I've tried to do that in the past, and I was just wondering if we should start in succession, or does it really matter?
If we should?
Start in succession, start with the prayers of Srila Prabhupada, or does it really matter? Some of Narottam Das Thakur's songs are just so, when he mentions about how he breaks his head against a rock, because he's been feeling such separation from Lord Caitanya. And then
yeah, so
just wondering what mood I should have.
I think the mood is the actual important thing here. So how heartfelt is one's expression? If I'm saying the words, do I actually know the intent, the meaning behind those words, and is it said with real feeling? If we even just utter Krishna's name once with true feeling, we can achieve Krishna Prema. So I would recommend that you find any and all expressions which you can really take to heart and find that they evoke a sentiment in you, that I feel like, yes, I can actually feel myself saying that to Krishna in a heartfelt way and meaning it. Krishna appreciates our effort, our attempts to compose, and of course you can use your own expression to engage with Krishna, to talk to Krishna. But it's recommended that we've probably still got our training wheels on. So if we know that we're repeating a bona fide prayer that was already accepted and acceptable, and Krishna sees that we're doing that in a spirit of wanting to please him. As I say, most of the time in our conditioned life, we want something from Krishna. Prabhupada would use the term order supplier. We've turned Krishna into someone who's doing things for us, as opposed to being his humble kinkara, is the word Lord Chaitanya uses, servant. But yeah, if you feel a particular resonance with one of Prabhupada's prayers, or one of Srila Narottam Das Thakur's prayers, or one of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's prayers, they're all great. And Lord Krishna will simply appreciate our effort. Bhavagrahi. Krishna is Bhavagrahi. He appreciates the mood and accepts the mood. We may not even pronounce the Sanskrit or the Bengali perfectly. Krishna's not a traffic warden, I'm writing you up for a small fault. That's a different kind of concept of God. Krishna is absolutely eager. Prabhupada would say more eager that we return than we are at this point to go. Hope that addresses your question.
I was very keen on the other question in relation to that. Sometimes the mood of the great acharyas, you can feel like you can identify with it, but obviously I'm not on that level, but like for some prayers, you can identify with more than others, and I often think that, do I have to be careful to make sure that I'm not, like sometimes I worry about that I'm not in the right consciousness to be identifying. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes when Narottam Das Thakur, when he's talking about feeling like separation from Krishna, or like when it's mentioned about Nityananda, I'm so unhappy, and please, we're worshipping you, then I can become happy, or
in our conditioned state, the reality is we won't have a deep realization, or we won't be that sincere, or whatever. So if we have some appreciation that is our condition, and we're simply endeavoring our best, it's a little bit like Shravan Kirtan. Here is something I have heard from one of the great souls. I have some appreciation. By practicing now, repeating that, over time I'm hoping that some insight, some realization will be bestowed upon me, that Krishna will be somehow pleased by my little offering of appreciation. But we shouldn't expect that overnight somehow we become fit to recite these things, or pretty impressive towards Krishna or whatever. If we're filled with a sense of appreciation and fortune, how lucky I am to even have the opportunity to word this prayer previously spoken by Prahlad Maharaj. Krishna will look at that spirit of appreciation and take great happiness from it. If we're going, check out the slokas that I know, how cool am I? How deep will he realize? Krishna thinks, back in the washing machine for this fellow for a little while. I think we'll put him on extra soiled, the extra soiled setting. I won't go over longer. It's 8:35, so I apologize if I've kept you from Prashanam. Srila Prabhupada ki.